I was 68 and sipping my morning coffee when I heard the crunch of gravel in my driveway. My daughter-in-law's Sandra's silver SUV gleamed in the sunlight, and I felt that familiar twist in my stomach. My son Thomas stepped out first, followed by Sandra and my grandchildren, Emma and Jack. They rarely visited without wanting something. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mom, we need to talk, Thomas said, not quite meeting my eyes as they all filed into my kitchen. Sandra immediately began opening cabinets, rearranging mugs as if my home were a display she'd been hired to improve. Would anyone like coffee? I asked, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. No one responded. We're thinking you should take that seniors cruise you've been talking about, Sandra said finally, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. The one to Alaska. It would be good for you to get out more. I'd mentioned that cruise exactly once, 2 years ago, at a family dinner. I'd never seriously considered it. That's thoughtful, but I'm not interested in— Mom, Thomas interrupted. We've already booked it. It leaves next week, 10 days along the coast. Everything's paid for. My hands froze around my coffee mug. You— What? It's a gift, Sandra said, smiling too widely. You deserve a vacation. Emma, my 14-year-old granddaughter, shifted uncomfortably by the door, clutching her phone. 12-year-old Jack stared at the floor. Their discomfort told me everything I needed to know. Why the sudden generosity? I asked, setting my mug down carefully. 47 years of controlling my expressions had taught me how to keep my face neutral when I suspected I was being manipulated. Thomas cleared his throat. The house needs some repairs. We thought it would be easier if you weren't here while the work was being done. What repairs? I just had the roof fixed last spring. Sandra jumped in. The kitchen is so outdated, Martha. Those cabinets are from, the 80s? And the bathrooms need complete overhauls. I looked around my kitchen. The oak cabinets I'd refinished myself 5 years ago. The granite countertops my late husband James had installed just before his heart attack. There's nothing wrong with my kitchen. Mom, Thomas sighed, you're not getting any younger. We need to think about resale value. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Resale value. The words hung in the air. I'm not selling my house. Not now, Sandra said quickly, but eventually. Better to get it updated while you still have the energy to enjoy the improvements. I knew this script. I'd watched it play out with my friend Eleanor last year. A surprise vacation, renovations that somehow expanded into major remodeling, and discussions of next steps that ended with Eleanor in Sunny Meadows retirement community, while her daughter's family moved into her lakeside home. When does this cruise leave? Sunday, Thomas said, relief evident in his voice. We've already packed a suitcase for you. They'd been in my closet. The violation sent a cold chill down my spine. And where's this suitcase now? In the car. Just a few essentials. Anything else you need we can buy on the way to the port. I smiled, not because I was pleased, but because I was calculating. How thoughtful. Let me get my purse and we can go through the itinerary. When I returned from my bedroom, I heard Sandra whispering furiously to Thomas in the kitchen. After the cruise, we'll bring up the assisted living brochures. Dr. Miller already said he'd signed the— She stopped abruptly when she saw me. That night, after they'd left, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, making lists. First, the facts. Thomas and Sandra had financial problems they hadn't disclosed. Their youngest was starting college next year. Their house had been refinanced twice, and my home, paid off, waterfront property in a desirable neighborhood would solve all their problems if I weren't in it. Second, my resources, my pension, modest savings, and the house itself. My friend Marion, who'd offered me her guest room anytime. My neighbor Frank, retired police officer who kept an eye on my place when I traveled. My younger sister Beth in Arizona, who had been begging me to visit. Or I could appear to play along and use the time to implement a plan of my own. I called Frank first. Would you keep an extra close eye on my place next week? Thomas and Sandra are planning some renovations I didn't approve. They pulling that game on you too? Frank's voice was grim. Happened to Bill over on Maple last year. Came back from visiting his daughter to find half his stuff in storage and a for sale sign in the yard. That's what I'm afraid of, I admitted. Can you check daily? Call me if you see anything concerning. Count on it, Martha, and I'll have my camera ready. Next, I called my attorney, Louisa. We'd worked together when James died, and she'd helped me update my will last year. Martha, good to hear from you. What can I do for you? I explained the situation, including Sandra's whispered comment about getting a doctor to sign something. Louisa's tone turned serious. Sounds like they might be planning to petition for guardianship while you're away. Claiming you're unable to manage your affairs would give them control of your assets, including your house. Can they do that? They can try, but not if we're prepared. Come by tomorrow. We'll drop some documents to protect you. My final call was to Marion. Remember when you said I could stay in your guest room anytime? How about next week? Of course, but I thought Thomas mentioned you were going on a cruise. That's what Thomas and Sandra think. I'll explain everything when I see you. The next day, I visited my doctor for a cognitive assessment, perfect score, my bank to secure my accounts, and Louisa's office to sign powers of attorney appointing Marion and Beth as my decision-makers, not Thomas. I made copies of important documents and family photos, packing them in a bag that I stored in Marion's garage. On Sunday morning, Thomas and Sandra arrived to drive me to the port. I brought a small carry-on bag with essentials, acting excited about the cruise. When we arrived at the terminal, I asked Thomas to park so they could all walk me to check-in. That's not necessary, Mom, he said. There are reporters who can help you. I'd like you to come with me, I insisted. I might need help with the paperwork. Reluctantly, they parked and accompanied me inside the crowded terminal. I approached the check-in counter with my passport. I don't see a reservation for Martha Wilson, the agent said after typing my name. There must be a mistake, Sandra said impatiently. We booked it weeks ago. The confirmation email. She began scrolling through her phone. While Sandra and Thomas were distracted with the agent, I slipped away through the crowd, heart pounding. Outside, I quickly hailed a taxi. Where to, ma'am? The driver asked. Oakwood Apartments, please, I said, giving him Marion's address. As we pulled away, I saw Thomas emerge from the terminal, scanning the sidewalk frantically. Our eyes met for just a moment through the taxi window. The confusion on his face would have been comical if it hadn't been so heartbreaking. My phone began ringing immediately. I sent his calls to voicemail, then texted, I know what you and Sandra were planning. I'm safe and with friends. Don't try to find me. I'll contact you when I'm ready. I turned off my phone and watched the city slip by through the taxi window. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. At Marion's apartment, I settled into her comfortable guest room and turned my phone back on to find 17 missed calls and a dozen increasingly frantic texts from Thomas. Where are you? The cruise line says you never had a reservation. Mom, this isn't funny. We're worried about you. Please call us. We're considering filing a missing person report. The last one read, Sandra thinks someone might have taken advantage of you. We're going to your house to check if you went back there. I smiled grimly and called Frank. They just pulled up, he confirmed. Want me to go over? No, but please keep watching. Let me know what they do. Over the next few hours, Frank provided updates. Thomas and Sandra spent nearly 2 hours in my house. They made multiple calls, growing increasingly agitated. Sandra brought in several large empty boxes from their car. Eventually, they left, looking frustrated. They took some boxes with them, Frank reported. Want me to check what the missing? His call came 20 minutes later. Martha, they cleaned out your closet. All your clothes are gone, and your jewelry box. The bathroom's empty too. Toiletries, medications, everything. I'd expected something like this, but the reality still stung. Anything else? The kitchen looks untouched. So does the living room. Just your personal items from what I can tell. Thanks, Frank. Please keep watching the house. That evening, I called Beth to update her on the situation. I'm coming to stay with you next week, if that's still okay. Of course it is. But Martha, shouldn't she call the police? They took your things. Not yet. I want to see how far they'll go first. The next morning, Frank called. There's a dumpster in your driveway and a truck from Johnson's renovation. Looks like they're starting work. Without my permission? My hands clenched into fists. Can you see what they're doing? They're ripping out your kitchen cabinets. I can see them carrying pieces out to the dumpster. A wave of fury washed over me. Those cabinets held memories, James and I refinishing them together, the height marks of the grandchildren penciled inside one door, a slight dent where James had accidentally dropped a cast iron pan. I'm calling my attorney, I told Frank. Louisa was appropriately outraged. We'll file for an emergency injunction to stop the renovation, and we should document everything, take photos, get statements from neighbors. I want to go back to the house, I said. Not yet. Let me handle the legal side first. We need to establish that this is happening without your consent. By that afternoon, Louisa had secured an emergency court order to halt any further renovations. She had it served to the contracting company and to Thomas and Sandra's home address. Frank called again. The workers have left, and they look confused. Thomas just arrived and is having what appears to be a very heated phone conversation. My phone rang minutes later. Thomas. I answered, keeping my voice neutral. Hello, Thomas. Mom, where have you been? We've been worried sick. The cruise line had no record of your reservation, and you disappeared. A cruise I never agreed to take, I interrupted. On a ship where I never had a reservation. How exactly was that going to work, Thomas? There was a pause. There was a mix-up with the booking. Stop lying to me. I know what you and Sandra were planning. Get out of my house and take your renovation crew with you. If anything else is removed or damaged, I'll press charges for theft and destruction of property. Mom, you don't understand. We're trying to help you. The house is too much for you to manage alone. Where are my clothes, Thomas? And my jewelry? Another pause. Sandra took them to be cleaned and organized. Return everything by tomorrow or I'll report it stolen. And the renovation? Did it ever occur to you to ask my permission before ripping out my kitchen? We wanted to surprise you. With what? A reason to sell my house and move into assisted living? Yes, I heard Sandra talking about getting Dr. Miller to sign papers. His sharp intake of breath confirmed my suspicions. Mom, you're not thinking clearly. Maybe we should meet with Dr. Miller together just to talk. I've already had a cognitive assessment, Thomas. I scored perfectly. I've also updated my legal documents with my attorney. You and Sandra are no longer my healthcare proxies or powers of attorney. You can't do that. The shock in his voice was almost satisfying. I already have. Now I want everything returned to my house immediately. The renovation stops now. And Thomas, don't ever try something like this again. I hung up, hands shaking but mind clear. For decades, I'd been the supportive mother, the doting grandmother, the widow who didn't make waves. But they had underestimated me. They'd forgotten, or perhaps never known, that beneath my accommodating exterior was a woman who had managed a department of 30 people, who had navigated the healthcare system during James' long illness, who had rebuilt her life after his death. That evening, Marion and I sat on her balcony with glasses of wine, watching the sunset. "Do you think they'll back down?" she asked. "They don't have a choice. The legal documents are clear. The court order is in place. I took a sip of wine. But the relationship may never recover. I don't know if I can forgive this. Give it time, Marian advised. Focus on protecting yourself first. The next day, Frank reported that a cleaning crew had arrived at my house, followed by Thomas and Sandra returning boxes, presumably containing my belongings. They look furious, Frank noted. Sandra keeps gesturing and shaking her head. 3 days later, with Luisa's approval, I returned home. Frank accompanied me, camera in hand, to document any damage. The kitchen was a disaster. Half-dismantled cabinets, exposed wiring, countertops removed. My clothes had been dumped in piles on my bed. Jewelry boxes emptied into a tangled heap on my dresser. Document everything, Luisa had instructed. Frank methodically photographed each room while I made notes. That afternoon, I filed police reports for the unauthorized renovation and the taking of my personal property. I also filed a civil suit against Thomas and Sandra for the damages, with Luisa representing me. When Thomas learned about the legal actions, he called, sounding desperate. "Mom, please, we can work this out as a family. You don't need lawyers and police." This stopped being a family matter when you tried to trick me onto a non-existent cruise and renovate my house without permission, when you took my clothes and jewelry, when you conspired to have me declared incompetent. We weren't— I heard Sandra talking about it, Thomas. Don't insult me by lying again. His voice broke. "We're in financial trouble, Mom. The business isn't doing well, and Emma's college tuition—" "Then you should have asked for help, not tried to steal my house." There was a long silence. "What do you want from us?" "I want my house restored to its previous condition. I want a written apology from both of you, and I want your word that you'll never try anything like this again." "And the lawsuit? The police report?" "I'll consider dropping them once the house is repaired." 2 weeks later, after the repairs were completed and I'd received their written apology, I invited Thomas to meet me at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. He arrived looking haggard with dark circles under his eyes. "Mom, I held up my hand. "I don't want excuses, Thomas. I want to understand why. Why not just ask for help?" He stared into his coffee. "Pride, I guess, and shame. The business has been failing for years, but I kept thinking I could turn it around. Sandra's been pushing me to ask you to invest, but I couldn't admit I'd failed." "So instead you thought you'd send me away and take my house?" He winced. "It sounds terrible when you put it like that." "Because it is terrible, Thomas. It's elder abuse. It's what happens to old people in cautionary news stories." "We didn't see it that way. We told ourselves we were helping you downsize, move somewhere safer." "Against my will, without my knowledge." He had the decency to look ashamed. "I'm sorry, Mom. Truly. We got desperate and made terrible choices." I studied his face, the boy I'd raised, the man who tried to deceive me. "I've created a trust for Emma and Jack's education. It can only be used for tuition and expenses. You and Sandra won't have access to it." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you. That's more than we deserve. As for your business, I'll need to see the books before I consider any investment. And it would be a loan, not a gift, with proper documentation." "Of course." I took a deep breath. "And I'm selling the house." His head snapped up. "But what? But you fought so hard to keep it." "I fought for my right to decide its fate, not yours. I've accepted an offer from a lovely young family. I'm using part of the proceeds to buy a condo in Beth's community in Arizona." "You're moving away?" The panic in his voice was palpable. "I need distance, Thomas. What you and Sandra did broke something fundamental between us. Trust takes time to rebuild. But the grandkids will always be welcome to visit, and I'll come back for important events. but I need to create a life where I feel safe and valued. As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt lighter than I had in months. The house that had become a battleground would soon belong to a family who would create their own memories there. The money would secure my future and help my grandchildren with college. And I would start fresh in Arizona, near Beth, in a community where I can make new friends and build a new life. Thomas and Sandra had tried to steal my autonomy, thinking my age made me vulnerable. Instead, they'd awakened the strongest parts of me, the parts that knew how to fight, how to strategize, how to stand firm. They'd tried to take my home, but had inadvertently given me something more valuable, the courage to choose my own path forward, on my own terms. 3 months later, as I sat on my new balcony in Arizona, watching the desert sunset with Beth, my phone chimed with a text from Emma. "Grandma, can I visit during spring break? I got accepted to ASU and want to check out the campus." I smiled as I replied, "Of course, sweetheart, my door is always open to you." The future stretched before me, different than I'd imagined, but entirely my own. The desert sun was just beginning to set as I settled onto my new balcony in Arizona, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. 3 months had passed since I'd left behind the lakeside house that Thomas and Sandra had tried to take from me. I still felt occasional pangs when I thought about the oak cabinets James had helped me refinish. But my new condo, with its mountain views and friendly neighbors, was starting to feel like home. "Another gorgeous sunset," Beth said, joining me with 2 glasses of iced tea. My sister had been my rock through this transition, helping me furnish the condo and introducing me to her friends in the community. "I never tire of them," I replied, taking the glass. "Different from the lake, but beautiful in their own way." My phone buzzed with an incoming email. I glanced down to see a message from Johnson's Renovation with the subject line, "Final payment request, Wilson Property." "Is that from Thomas?" Beth asked, noticing my frown. "No, it's the renovation company. Apparently, there's still an outstanding balance for the work they did before I stopped them." I scrolled through the email. "Almost $8,000. That's ridiculous. They worked without your permission." "I know, but Thomas signed a contract. I'm guessing he hasn't paid them, and now they're coming after me since it's my property." Beth shook her head. "Forward it to Louisa. Let her handle it." I did just that, then set my phone aside, determined not to let it ruin our evening. But the email had reopened wounds I thought were healing. The memory of returning to my half-destroyed kitchen, my clothes dumped carelessly on the bed, the tangle of jewelry that had taken hours to sort through, all of it came rushing back. "You're thinking about the house again." Not just the house. Everything it represented. I sighed. 43 years of marriage, raising Thomas there. All those memories. The memories came with you, Martha. Some did. Others were tied to the place itself. The kitchen table where we had family dinners. The tree in the backyard where James built that ridiculous treehouse. I smiled at the memory. Remember how it leaned to one side? And he kept saying he'd fix it but never did. I remember Thomas was convinced it would fall with him in it, but it never did. I took a sip of tea. I know selling was the right decision, but sometimes I wonder if I gave up too easily, if I let them drive me away. Beth reached over to squeeze my hand. "You didn't give up anything. You made a choice. Your choice. That's what matters." She was right, of course. After everything that had happened, I could have stayed and fought to maintain the increasingly strained relationship with Thomas and Sandra. I could have remained in the house, watching them during every visit for signs they were planning another attempt to move me out. Instead, I'd chosen freedom and peace of mind. My phone rang. Thomas. We'd spoken only a handful of times since our coffee shop meeting, mostly brief, awkward conversations about practical matters. "I should take this," I told Beth, who nodded and discreetly went inside to give me privacy. "Hello, Thomas." "Mom?" His voice sounded strained. I just got a call from Johnson Renovation. They're threatening to put a lien on the old house if their final bill isn't paid. I just got their email. I forwarded it to Louisa. I'll handle it, Mom. You shouldn't have to deal with this. No, you shouldn't have hired them without my permission in the first place. A heavy sigh came through the line. I know, I'm sorry. I'll pay the bill. Can you afford it? I asked, softening slightly. You mentioned the business was struggling.
We'll manage. There was a pause. How's Arizona? It's good. Different. I'm making friends, joining activities. Beth has been wonderful. The kids miss you. His voice caught slightly. Emma got her acceptance to ASU yesterday. She wants to visit you during spring break. Pride swelled in my chest. She told me about the acceptance. I'm so pleased for her. She says you've been helping her with her application essays. We've had some good video chats. She's a smart girl, Thomas. Another pause. Mom, we should talk about what happened. Really talk, not just about bills and practical stuff. I watched the last sliver of sun disappear behind the mountains. I'm not sure I'm ready for that conversation yet. Will you ever be? I don't know. The answer was honest, if painful. What you and Sandra tried to do, it shook me to my core, made me question everything I thought I knew about our relationship. We were desperate, he said quietly. The business was failing. We had remortgaged the house twice. Sandra's parents had already bailed us out once and refused to do it again. When we looked at all our assets, there was nothing left except my house, I finished. So you decided to take it. We didn't see it that way then. We told ourselves we were helping you downsize to somewhere more appropriate for your age, that we'd be nearby to take care of you, while living in my home and controlling my assets. He didn't deny it. I'm not proud of what we did, Mom. Have you told the children the truth, or do they still think their grandmother abandoned them by moving across the country on a whim? Emma knows. She overheard things she shouldn't have. She was furious with us. Still is. Jack thinks you moved to be closer to Beth after her husband died. I made a mental note to correct that misunderstanding with Jack during our next video chat. And Sandra? Is she still angry about the lawsuit? She's coming to terms with everything. It's been hard on our marriage. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction at that, but mostly I just felt sad. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? The question wasn't accusatory, just quietly curious. Yes, Thomas. Despite everything, I don't want your marriage to fail or your business to collapse. I don't want revenge. I just wanted to be treated with respect and dignity. I understand that now, he said softly. Too late, probably. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of all that had happened and all that could have been hanging between us. I should go, I finally said. It's getting late here. Right. I'll take care of the bill with Johnson's. You won't hear from them again. Thank you. Mom, he said just as I was about to hang up, I am sorry. Truly. After we disconnected, I sat in the gathering darkness thinking about forgiveness. Was it possible to forgive such a profound betrayal? Did I even want to? Beth came back outside with a light wrap for my shoulders against the evening chill. Everything okay? Thomas is going to handle the renovation bill. I pulled the wrap tighter around me. He also said Emma knows the truth about what happened and that she's still angry with them. Smart girl. She takes after her grandmother. I smiled faintly. He said it's been hard on their marriage. Beth settled back in her chair. Are you surprised? No. Trust once broken is difficult to restore. I imagine Sandra blames Thomas for how badly their plan failed, and he resents her for pushing him into it in the first place. Sounds familiar, she said gently. Isn't that what's happening between you and Thomas? I looked at her sharply. That's different. I'm not his spouse. I'm his mother, the person he conspired against. I'm not saying it's the same. Just that broken trust is at the heart of both relationships now.
She reached for my hand. The question is, do you want to rebuild that trust? Or are you content to let the relationship remain distant? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. The next morning, I woke to a text from Emma. Booked my flight for spring break. Can't wait to see you and tour ASU. Love you, Grandma. That message brightened my day. Unlike my strained conversations with Thomas, my relationship with Emma had actually deepened since the incident. She'd reached out shortly after I moved to Arizona, apologetic for her part in the deception, though she had largely been kept in the dark about her parents' true intentions. I knew something was wrong, she'd confessed during one of our video chats.
One where I was respected, valued, and free to make my own decisions. One where forgiveness remained a possibility, but was no longer a necessity for my happiness. As I joined Beth on the patio, helping her arrange coffee cups for the meeting, I realized that while Thomas and Sandra had taken my clothes, tried to take my house, and attempted to take my independence, they had inadvertently given me something far more valuable: the opportunity to rediscover myself at a time in life when many people stop growing. For that, ironically, I could almost thank them. The Arizona summer blazed hot and bright, but I'd come to appreciate the dry heat over the humid summers back home. 6 months had passed since Emma's spring break visit, and now August brought the promise of change once again. Emma would be moving into her dorm at ASU in just 3 days, and Thomas was flying out to help, and to see me for the first time since our confrontation at the coffee shop. My morning routine had become sacred. Up at 6 a.m. to beat the worst of the heat, a brisk walk with the community group, then coffee on my balcony while watching the desert come alive. Today, however, my usual peace was disturbed by a growing anxiety about Thomas's impending visit. "You're overthinking this," Beth said, joining me for our weekly sister breakfast at my place. She spread cream cheese on her bagel with the precise, methodical strokes that characterized everything she did. "You've spoken on the phone several times. You're in a better place now." "Phone calls are different," I countered. "I won't be able to hang up when things get uncomfortable." Beth fixed me with the stern look she'd perfected decades ago as an elementary school principal. "Martha, you're 70 years old. If you want to walk away from a conversation, you'll walk away." I couldn't help but laugh. "When did you become the wise one?" "I've always been the wise one. You were just too busy being the responsible one to notice." She had a point. Throughout our lives, I'd been the practical sister, the one who made sensible choices, built a stable career, stayed in one place. Beth had taught in 7 different states, married and divorced twice before finding her late husband, Richard, and generally approached life with a spontaneity I'd both envied and distrusted. "What exactly are you afraid will happen?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. "I'm afraid he'll try to justify what they did, or worse, that I'll find myself forgiving them too easily because it's easier than maintaining the conflict." "Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting," Beth reminded me. "You can forgive without becoming vulnerable to the same hurt again." I know that intellectually. Emotionally is another matter. My phone chimed with a text from Emma. "Dad's freaking out about seeing you. Made me help him pick out a shirt this morning. It's kind of adorable and sad at the same time." I smiled despite my anxiety. "Apparently Thomas is nervous too," I told Beth, showing her the message. "Good," she said firmly. "He should be." The day of Thomas's arrival dawned clear and hot, the temperature predicted to reach 104 degrees by afternoon. I'd arranged to meet them for dinner at a restaurant Beth had recommended, neutral territory that would allow us to part ways if things became too uncomfortable. I spent the day alternating between cleaning my already immaculate condo and sitting on the balcony trying to calm my nerves with deep breathing exercises. At 4 p.m., I began getting ready, changing my outfit 3 times before settling on a simple blue dress that James had always said brought out my eyes. As I fastened my silver earrings, a birthday gift from Emma last year,
I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at me was not the same one who had stood in my bathroom in Michigan a year ago, preparing for what I thought would be a routine visit from my son and his family. That woman had been complacent, trusting to the point of naivete, defining herself primarily as a wife, mother, and grandmother. The woman in the mirror now had learned to stand her ground, to rebuild her life on her own terms, to find strength in solitude. The lines around my eyes seemed to tell a different story now, not just of age, but of wisdom hard-won. I arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes early, requesting a quiet table on the patio where the misters created a pleasant respite from the heat. My heart raced when I spotted them walking from the parking lot. Thomas, in a blue button-down shirt I didn't recognize. Emma looking grown-up and confident in a sundress. Emma reached me first, wrapping me in a tight hug. "Grandma, I've missed you so much." "I've missed you too, sweetheart." I held her at arm's length. "You look wonderful." Thomas hung back, uncertainty written across his features. He'd lost weight, I noticed, and his hair had more gray than I remembered. "Mom," he said, his voice catching slightly, "you look great. Arizona agrees with you." I stepped forward, and after a moment's hesitation, gave him a brief hug. "It's good to see you, Thomas." The awkwardness of the initial greeting gradually eased as we ordered drinks and appetizers. Emma carried much of the conversation, bubbling with excitement about her dorm room, her class schedule, and her new roommate whom she'd been texting all summer. "What about you, Mom?" Thomas asked during a lull. "Beth mentioned you've joined some community activities." "Yes, I'm in the garden club, though I'm still learning what actually grows in the desert. And I've joined a book club and a weekly card group." "She's also volunteering at the community library 2 afternoons a week," Emma added proudly, "and taking a photography class." Thomas looked genuinely pleased. "That's wonderful. You always talked about getting into photography after retirement." "I finally had the time and space to pursue it," I said, the unspoken implication hanging between us. Time and space I'd found only after being forced to start over. An uncomfortable silence fell. Emma glanced between us, then suddenly stood. "I see someone from my orientation group at the bar. I'm going to say hi. Be right back." As she walked away, I knew with absolute certainty that there was no orientation friend. It was a transparent excuse to give us privacy. Smart girl. "Subtle, isn't she?" Thomas said with a small smile. "About as subtle as her father at that age." He twisted his water glass slowly. "Mom, I know we've talked on the phone, but being here in person, I need to say it face to face. I'm profoundly sorry for what we tried to do to you. There's no excuse, none." I studied him carefully, looking for signs of the practiced sincerity he'd sometimes displayed when apologizing without really meaning it. Instead, I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. "What would have happened if I hadn't discovered your plan?" I asked. "Would you really have moved me into assisted living against my will?" He looked down at the table. "I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. I want to believe we would have come to our senses, but honestly, I don't know. We were in a spiral of bad decisions by then." "And Sandra, where does she stand now?" "She's—" He hesitated. "She's still working through things. She blames me for not handling it better. I blame her for pushing the idea in the first place. But we're in counseling, trying to rebuild." "I'm glad to hear that," I said sincerely. "How's the business?" "Stabilizing. The loan you arranged helped us restructure some debt. We're not out of the woods, but we can see a path forward now." After I'd moved to Arizona, I'd had Louisa structure a business loan for Thomas with clear terms and repayment schedules. Helping without enabling, maintaining boundaries while still supporting my son. And Jack, how's he handling everything? He's good. Started high school this fall. He asks about you a lot, wants to know when he can visit. He's welcome any time, I said, meaning it. I've missed him. He misses you too. We all do. Thomas looked directly at me. The house isn't the same without you. It's not your house, I said automatically, then immediately regretted the defensive tone. You're right. It's not. He nodded. The new family seems nice, though. The wife stopped by the office to ask about some electrical work. They have twin girls, about 6 years old. I smiled, imagining children bringing life to the old house again. I'm glad. It needs a family. Emma returned, seeming pleased to find us still in conversation rather than awkward silence. The rest of dinner passed pleasantly enough, with Emma's excitement about college providing plenty of safe topics. As we finished dessert, Thomas cleared his throat. Mom, I know this is asking a lot, but would you consider coming with us tomorrow to help Emma set up her dorm room? I thought it should be a family thing. Emma's eyes lit up. Please, Grandma, it would mean so much to have you there.
So, taking my house was about your pride? Partly, and partly fear. Fear of failing my family. He met my eyes. I was so focused on what I thought I was losing that I couldn't see what I was throwing away. Your trust, your respect, our relationship. I reached across the table to cover his hand with mine. You haven't lost those things forever, Thomas. They're damaged, yes, but not beyond repair. Really? Hope flickered in his eyes. Really? But the rebuilding will take time and consistent effort from both of us. I can do that, he said firmly. I want to do that. As we parted at the cafe, Thomas surprised me with a tentative hug that I found myself returning without hesitation. Thank you, he whispered, for not giving up on me. You're my son, I said simply. That doesn't change, even when everything else does. Watching him drive away, I felt a curious mixture of emotions, lingering hurt, cautious hope, and unexpected peace. The wound was still there, but it had begun to heal, the edges no longer quite so raw. Back in my condo, I found an envelope Thomas had slipped into my purse at some point during our time together. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small silver charm in the shape of a house. The letter read, Mom, I know a single conversation can't undo the pain I caused. I know trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, but I want you to know that I'm committed to that rebuilding process, however long it takes. This charm isn't meant to replace the home we nearly took from you. Rather, it's a promise that I will never again try to make your choices for you, or put my interests above your well-being. Thank you for showing me what true strength looks like, not in dominating others, but in standing firm in your own truth, even when those who should support you try to undermine you. I love you, Mom. Always have, always will. Thomas. I held the small silver charm in my palm, feeling its weight. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a symbol of what might yet be built. Later that week, I added the charm to a bracelet Beth had given me for my birthday. It nestled alongside other meaningful symbols: a book representing my love of reading, a camera for my new hobby, and a sun for my Arizona life. The house charm didn't dominate the bracelet, just as my identity as Thomas's mother no longer defined me completely. It was one facet of who I was, important, but not all-encompassing. That evening, I joined a group from my community for a sunset photography class in the desert. As the sky transformed from blue to orange to deep purple, I captured image after image, each slightly different from the last. "Beautiful work, Martha," said Carlos, our instructor, glancing at my camera screen. "You have an eye for transformation." "I've had some practice lately," I replied with a smile. Diane, my walking group friend,
joined us as we packed up our equipment. "A bunch of us are going for drinks at the clubhouse. Will you join us?" A year ago, I might have declined, preferring the familiar comfort of my own company. Now I nodded enthusiastically. "I'd love to." As we walked back through the gathering darkness, Diane asked, "How did it go with your son's visit? Beth mentioned you were nervous about seeing him." "Better than expected. We're finding our way to a new kind of relationship." "That's good to hear. Family is complicated." "It is," I agreed. "But so is starting over at 70. I think I can handle both." At the clubhouse, our group claimed a large table on the patio. Wine was poured, stories were shared, and laughter flowed easily. Looking around at these people who had become my friends, Beth, of course, but also Diane, Carlos, and half a dozen others whose lives had intertwined with mine in this unexpected chapter, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Thomas and Sandra's betrayal had forced me to rebuild my life, but the foundation I'd created was stronger than I could have imagined. I had discovered parts of myself that might have remained dormant in the comfortable familiarity of my old life. Resilience, adaptability, and a surprising capacity for joy, even after heartbreak. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "First college class tomorrow. Nervous, but excited. Love you, Grandma." I smiled as I typed my reply. "You'll be amazing. Remember, new beginnings are always a little scary, but they're how we grow. Love you too."
"Your home is lovely, Martha," she said as they settled into my living room an hour later. Her eyes took in the open floor plan, the desert-inspired color scheme, the large windows that showcased the mountain view. "Thank you," I replied. "It suits me." "It does," she agreed, and something in her tone suggested she genuinely meant it. Over dinner, Jack dominated the conversation with tales of his high school basketball team and his new interest in computer programming. Emma shared stories from her journalism classes and her internship at the student newspaper. Thomas spoke of his business, which had finally stabilized after implementing the restructuring plan we'd developed together. Sandra was quieter, but when she did speak, I noticed a new quality in her voice, a humility that hadn't been there before. After the dishes were cleared and the younger generation had retreated to the living room to watch a movie, Sandra approached me on the balcony where I had stepped out for a moment of quiet. "May I join you?" she asked tentatively. "Of course." We stood side by side, looking out at the lights of the community against the backdrop of the darkened desert. "I've rehearsed what to say to you for months," she began. "Apologies, explanations, justifications even. But standing here now, none of it seems adequate." "Sometimes simple truths are best," I suggested. She nodded, her hands gripping the railing. "The simple truth is that I was wrong. We were wrong. What we tried to do to you was inexcusable." "Yes, it was." "I've spent a lot of time trying to understand why I thought it was acceptable." She turned to look at me directly. "I think part of it was that I never saw you as a whole person, Martha. You were Thomas's mother, or the grandkid's grandmother. When I looked at your house, I saw an asset that could solve our problems, not your home filled with your memories." Her candor surprised me. "That's insightful." "Therapy helps," she said with a small smile. "Thomas and I have been going weekly since everything fell apart. It's been enlightening, if often painful." Growth usually is. "I don't expect forgiveness," she continued, "but I am grateful for this second chance to be part of your life. We're family, Sandra. Complicated, flawed, but still family." She wiped away a tear. "Thank you for including me this week. It would have been easier to invite just Thomas and the kids." "Easier, perhaps, but not right." I touched her arm briefly. "We all need to move forward together." The next morning, I took everyone on a tour of my community, proudly showing off the gardens I'd helped plant, the library where I volunteered, and the community center where I took my photography classes. We ended at the small gallery where several of my desert photographs were currently on display as part of a residence exhibition. "Grandma, these are amazing,"
Jack exclaimed, studying a black and white image of a twisted saguaro silhouetted against the dawn sky. "When did you get so good at this?" "I've had a lifetime to observe the world. I just needed the time and space to capture it." Sandra lingered in front of a photograph I'd titled Renewal, a close-up of delicate wildflowers emerging from a crack in the parched desert floor. "This one speaks to me," she said quietly. Thomas joined us, slipping his arm around my shoulders. "You've discovered talents we never knew you had, Mom." "Perhaps I needed to discover them for myself first," I suggested. Carlos approached, his face lighting up when he saw us examining the photographs. "Martha, I was hoping to catch you today." He turned to my family with the exuberant warmth that characterized him. "Your mother's work is exceptional, isn't it? Such an eye for resilience in difficult environments." I made the introductions, pleased to see my family engaging easily with one of my new friends. When Carlos mentioned the holiday concert, Thomas immediately expressed interest. "We'd love to attend. It would be nice to meet more of the people in Mom's life here." Later that afternoon, while Emma and Jack were swimming in the community pool and Thomas had stepped out to take a business call, Sandra helped me prepare dinner in my kitchen. "You seem happy here," she observed, as she chopped vegetables with precise, efficient movements. "Happier than I've seen you in years, actually." "I am happy. Though that doesn't mean that I don't miss aspects of my old life." She set down her knife. "Like what?" I considered the question seriously. The familiarity of places I'd known for decades, certain friends I don't see as often now, the garden I'd cultivated for years. I smiled wistfully. The tree where James built that ridiculous leaning treehouse for Thomas. "I never knew about a treehouse," Sandra said, surprised. "Thomas never mentioned it." It was nothing fancy, just some boards nailed to a sturdy oak. It leaned to one side because James never got around to reinforcing it properly. Thomas was convinced it would collapse with him inside, but it never did. "That sounds like Thomas," she laughed softly, always anticipating disaster. "He comes by it honestly. James was the same way." Sandra resumed her chopping. "Thomas hardly ever talks about his father. It's like he keeps those memories locked away." "Grief affects everyone differently," I said. "For me, talking about James keeps him present. For Thomas, perhaps it's too painful." "He's starting to open up more," Sandra offered. "Recently, he told the kids stories about fishing trips with his dad. It was the first time I'd heard many of those stories myself." "That's progress." I checked the oven temperature before adding, "Healing is rarely linear. Whether it's from grief or from betrayal, there are steps forward and steps back." Sandra looked at me thoughtfully. "Is that how you see our relationship now? Healing from betrayal?" "Yes," I said honestly. "The betrayal happened. We can't change that, but we can choose how we move forward from it. And how are we doing with that, moving forward?" I gestured around us, the two of us working together in my kitchen, the sounds of Emma and Jack laughing as they returned from the pool, Thomas's voice as he concluded his call on the balcony. "We're here, aren't we? All of us, together." That's more than I could have imagined a year ago. On Christmas Eve, we gathered in my living room, the space transformed by twinkling lights, evergreen garlands, and the small but festive tree Beth and I had decorated. Outside, luminarias lined the pathways of the community, their warm glow a southwestern tradition I'd quickly come to love. "Present time," Jack announced, his teenage coolness momentarily abandoned in the excitement of the holiday. We had agreed to exchange modest gifts, emphasizing thoughtfulness over expense. Jack gave me a hand-coded digital photo frame that cycled through family pictures he'd collected and digitized. Emma's gift was a leather-bound journal with a handwritten note on the first page, "For the next chapter of your adventures." Thomas presented me with a small box containing a delicate silver bracelet. "To replace the one Sandra took," he explained, a hint of the old pain flickering across his face. "It's beautiful," I said, fastening it around my wrist, alongside the charm bracelet I'd been building in Arizona. Sandra's gift was the most surprising, a carefully curated box of items from my old house that she'd secretly salvaged before the sale. The hand-painted mug James had given me on our last anniversary, a small quilted wall hanging my mother had made, the cookie jar that had always sat on my kitchen counter. I saved these during that time, she explained haltingly. I knew they were important to you. I've been keeping them safe, waiting for the right moment. Tears sprang to my eyes as I lifted each item from the box, each one a tangible connection to the life I'd left behind. I thought these were lost forever. I couldn't save everything, she admitted, but these pieces, they seem like they held the most memories. It was the most meaningful gesture she could have made, an acknowledgement of the wrong she'd done, and a genuine attempt to make amends in whatever small way she could. My gifts to them were equally personal. For Jack, a vintage camera that had belonged to his grandfather. For Emma, a set of first-edition books by her favorite author that I'd tracked down through a local collector. For Thomas, a restored photo album chronicling his childhood years. And for Sandra, a delicate watercolor painting of desert wildflowers created by a talented artist in our community. I thought it reminded of you, I told her, surprising strength in seemingly harsh conditions. Her eyes widened at the unexpected compliment. Thank you, Martha. That means more than you know. After gifts, we bundled up against the desert evening chill and joined Beth for the community's candlelight service, where we stood among my new friends, singing carols under a star-filled sky. The juxtaposition of my past and present lives, my family beside me, my new community surrounding us, created a sense of fullness I hadn't expected to feel again. On our walk home, Jack fell into step beside me. Unlike Emma, he'd been largely sheltered from the worst of the conflict between me and his parents, and I'd worried our relationship might have suffered as a result. "Grandma," he began hesitantly, "I know something bad happened between you and my parents. Emma wouldn't tell me exactly what, but I figured it out. They tried to take your house, didn't they?" I glanced ahead to where Thomas, Sandra, and Emma walked with Beth, out of earshot. "Yes, they did. It was a difficult time for all of us." He nodded, processing this confirmation of his suspicions. "I heard Mom crying a lot after you moved away, and Dad stayed in his office most nights." "They made a terrible mistake," I said carefully, "but they've worked hard to make amends." "I was mad when I figured it out, but then I remembered something you told me once, about how the hardest test of love is whether you can forgive someone who's hurt you." I smiled, touched that he'd remembered. "That's true. Is that why you invited them here? Because you forgave them?" "Partly," I replied, "and partly because holding on to anger was hurting me as much as it was hurting them. At some point, you have to decide whether the relationship is worth saving, despite the pain." He considered this. "That's pretty wise, Grandma. I've had 71 years to practice wisdom," I laughed. "I should hope I've learned something by now." Christmas Day dawned clear and bright. We shared a leisurely breakfast on my balcony, then exchanged small stocking gifts, a tradition from my childhood that I'd maintained throughout the years. In the afternoon, my Arizona friends began arriving for the open house Beth and I were hosting. The blending of my two worlds, my family and my new community, created a tapestry of conversations, laughter, and shared stories that filled my home with a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert sun. I found myself in the kitchen with Diane and Sandra, both of them laughing as Carlos regaled them with tales of his disastrous first attempts at desert gardening. "He planted hydrangeas," Diane exclaimed, "in Arizona." "In my defense," Carlos protested, "they looked so beautiful in the catalog." Sandra smiled. "I've made similar mistakes. Our first house had a completely shaded yard, and I couldn't understand why my sunflowers kept dying." The easy camaraderie between them was yet another unexpected gift of this holiday. The worlds I'd kept carefully separated were merging naturally, creating something new and hopeful. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to depart, Thomas found me in a quiet corner. "Thank you for this week," he said, "for welcoming us, for giving us another chance." "Family isn't disposable, Thomas, even when it's complicated." "I've learned that the hard way," he acknowledged. "Watching you rebuild your life here, it's been humbling. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." Necessity is a powerful teacher, I replied. I didn't know I had this strength until I needed it. Dad would be proud of you, he said softly. I know I am. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone on my balcony, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal that had once seemed like the end of my world had instead become a painful but powerful catalyst for transformation. In losing my home, I'd found a deeper sense of self. In confronting betrayal, I'd discovered untapped reserves of courage. In rebuilding my life, I'd created something more authentic and fulfilling than what had been taken from me. The silver bracelet Thomas had given me caught the moonlight as I traced its delicate links with my finger. It wasn't a replacement for what was lost. Nothing could be that, but it was a symbol of something new, something hard-won. Like the wildflowers in my photograph, I had found a way to bloom in circumstances that might have destroyed me. A shooting star streaked across the desert sky, and I made a silent wish, not for things to return to how they were before, but for the wisdom to keep building on the foundation I'd created here, for the courage to keep growing, even when it was painful, for the capacity to forgive without forgetting the lessons learned. The new year would bring its own challenges. Emma was talking about studying abroad next fall. Thomas and Sandra were considering downsizing now that both children were launched. Beth had mentioned the possibility of a seniors tour to Europe that she wanted us to join.
Life would continue to change, as it always had. The difference now was that I faced those changes not as threats, but as opportunities, secure in the knowledge that I could navigate whatever came next. When I'd first arrived in Arizona, I'd felt like an exile, forced from my home, separated from my family, starting over when most people my age were settling into comfortable routines. Now I understood that what had felt like an ending had actually been a beginning. In the quiet desert night, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and conversation that had filled my home, I made one more resolution: to share what I'd learned with others who might be facing their own painful transitions. Perhaps my story could help another woman find her strength when life took an unexpected turn. The betrayal that had brought me here no longer defined me. It was simply part of my story, an important part, certainly, but not the conclusion. The real story was what had happened afterward, how I'd risen from the ashes of betrayal to build something beautiful and authentic, how I'd learned that it's never too late to rediscover yourself, to forge new connections, to create a life that reflects your truest values. As I finally went inside to sleep, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for the betrayal itself, but for the journey it had set in motion. A journey that had led me not just to a new home, but to a deeper understanding of myself and what truly matters in this one precious life we're given. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.